Welcome to the latest Balterra Wellness Podcast. I'm Jose Barbosa, and today's guest is Arturo Reyes, Senior Corporate Counsel at Pharmavite, with deep expertise in FDA, FTC, advertising law, and international regulatory compliance across food, dietary supplements, cosmetics, and consumer packaged goods. Arturo has built his career helping companies navigate the space where science, innovation, and regulation meet, making sure great products are also communicated responsibly and compliantly. I actually had the chance to work alongside Arturo during my time at Megafood, a division of Pharmavite, where I saw firsthand how he helps teams translate complex science into claims that hold up under real scrutiny. That makes him the perfect guest to help us unpack what supplement brands can and can't say, and how to build trust the right way. Arturo, welcome to the podcast. You, Arturo. Thank you. My first question for you, Arturo, is a really hard one. It's you travel the world, and I see you posting a lot on great foods, and I'm always envious about all the stuff you post and all the delicious stuff that you enjoy. So what are some of your favorite places to visit and foods that you enjoy? Because I think I'm talking to a foodie here, a food expert. So tell us, Arturo, about a little bit about your cuisine desires.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting because, I am a food lawyer and I've been involved in the food, industry as a legal advisor for quite a few years now. And before that, though, I've always been a foodie, as you mentioned. I would say, to answer your question, that there are two countries that I just can't get out of, and I just, their food drives me crazy, is Mexico and Italy. Italian food and Mexican food are my favorite. Japanese is close up there as well, although I've never been to Japan. But those would have to be the top two, Jose.
I love it. And I would have to agree on both of those. I lived in Italy for 2 years, and I ate the spaghetti carbonara, which was just absolutely fantastic. And I've been searching for it the way it tastes in Italy. I've been searching for it here and in other places, and I can't find it. So that authenticity comes through.
Yes, that is actually one of my favorite dishes in Italy. And you're right. I mean, it's really hard to find. I don't think I've ever found one as close as, to being that great and tasty as the one in Italy. But yes, I'm there with you.
Yeah. So then let's get into it. Arturo, you and I spent, quite a long time working together on launching products in the supplement space. And there were a lot of topics that I think people aren't aware of that are important in a supplement launch. And one of the key ones that I want our audience to take away a great message on is the topic around clinically studied, clinically shown, and clinically proven. And those very strong marketing claims, there's a little bit of confusion, whether it be on the regulatory side of things with the companies, whether it be on the marketing side of things, and that tension between, I want to say proven, but you're telling me it has to be, say, studied, but it's actually been shown, and that's a little bit stronger. So let's dive into that topic, which is a meaty topic. But I want to get your thoughts on, how do supplement companies navigate that specific claim of clinically studied versus clinically shown versus clinically proven?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Jose, and it's obviously one that's very relevant today. We've been seeing a lot of challenges, from private litigants and questions from certain agencies on these types of claims. And so, as you noted, in innovation, right, when we're working to kick off a product and decide on ingredients, that's where the scientists really come in and are super helpful to review clinical studies that are out there that do support, that they believe support ingredients and the benefits that we want to claim about those ingredients. And so it really ends up being an analysis on, is this an RCT that we believe substantiates the claims that we wanted to make, right? And so there, as you noted, there are also several different kind of variations, iterations of the claims. And so there's clinically tested, clinically studied, clinically proven, clinically shown, right? And I think that industry really sometimes has a hard time determining which one to use because, as you said, there's a lot of overlap, and also, at least from a consumer's point of view, and also from the regulator's point of view, right? The Federal Trade Commission has a health products compliance guide where they do note what they believe should be there to substantiate a clinically proven claim, so what they call an establishment claim or clinically shown, right? And there has been litigation where courts have noted that clinically shown and clinically proven are pretty much synonymous, right? So that's something that many marketers don't understand, right? And there's also the question for marketers and business people about, well, the study showed this, right? But we all know that there's different variables that go into a study, right? And things that might impact the outcome, right? And so it really becomes it has to be a consensus of scientific experts to really say, okay, great, this is what we, although maybe there's this, issue or thing that was lacking in the clinical study, we still believe and have and have the rationale to argue that it is adequate and appropriate substantiation for whatever type of clinical claim you want to make. There's also a claim that I started seeing recently is clinical dose, right? So we use the same dosage as we do in X clinical study. So that's another avenue that I have seen marketers take.
No, and that's super helpful. I think it's super clarifying for those in the industry who still struggle with, well, I just want to say what consumers are looking for, and we have a study, therefore I should be able to say it, right? There's a disconnect there, and the details matter. The details of the study, the number of studies, how many studies actually say the opposite, so there's a lot of nuance to what you can say. And that gives a black eye sometimes if you do it the wrong way. Then, we went pretty deep, and I think that's a good thing, especially since I really want the audience to take away some learnings there. But let's take a step back and just go general. Many people ask me particularly, but they ask everybody, are supplements regulated? And I find that fascinating because I come from the space, and to me, they're very regulated. But I'll ask you, who actually sits in that in particular space, and that you're an SME or a subject matter expert in that space. Are supplements regulated in your opinion?
Yes, absolutely. In short, and I, to bring it back to the first question about the international context, and because I am involved, and not as much in my current position, but before when I was at the law firm. I think it really helps to highlight the differences between the regulatory systems between different parts of the world, and also will answer your question about the U.S. Right. So, as I may have mentioned, I was recently in Germany, and one of the things that really stood out to me in Germany and in Mexico was looking at the supplement shelves. And at first glance, everything looks the same, right? The vitamin D, the magnesium, the omega-3s. But once you really step back, you realize that those shelves are shaped by completely different regulatory frameworks. So even though the labels look identical, the underlying products can be extremely different. Different dosages, different formulations, different assumptions about safety. So consumers that are comparing these think that they're the same, but in reality, they're not. And that really captures the core issue in supplements. Regulation is shaping not just what's in the product, but how it is presented and understood. So what I saw in Germany really reflects the European Union approach, where frameworks define which vitamins and minerals can be used and also in what forms. So there's a lot more standardization. And in the US, as you know, under the DSHEA, the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act of 1994, there's more flexibility in formulation, but there's a lot more reliance on post-market oversight. And for example, in Mexico, through COFEPRIS, which is the agency that oversees vitamin and supplement regs, you see a much more controlled approval-based system before products can even reach the shelf. So for example, right, vitamin D is actually the result of very different regulatory decisions depending on the country. And then what's interesting is that those differences don't just affect compliance, they affect how products are positioned and how consumers interpret them. But to get a little bit, now that, give you that kind of background, to get more specific into the US and your question. And so in the US, supplements are regulated under DSHEA, as I noted, which essentially treats them as a category of food, not drugs. So that's also, I think, something that a lot of consumers and people who are not in the industry don't really understand or know. So companies don't need pre-market approval like they do in Europe or Mexico. They are responsible in the US for ensuring safety and compliance, before the product is marketed. So that's pretty much what it is. So there is regulations, right? We do have to ensure that the science is there. We need to make sure that the ingredients that we want to include in these supplement products have a regulatory status, right? And there's a few ways to get to that regulatory status, but there is regulation. You can't just package things together and throw it out there and see. But yes, that is a misconception on that as well. And if I may add, it's not just about the formulation of the product, it's also about what you say, right? So the Federal Trade Commission focuses on advertising. So many claims made in marketing need to be truthful, not misleading and substantiated, as we just noted with the establishment claims like clinically studied. So you really do have a dual system in the US. FDA governs the product and the label, and FTC governs the claims and the marketing. And of course, Jose, that we have additional layers like GMPs and adverse event reporting, and of course the new dietary ingredient requirements.
Yes. So, that's again very, very transparent, and it helps people understand that dietary supplements are regulated, and that's such a big question. It continues to show up in many different ways, shapes, and forms. Social media is all over the place. I see it all the time, and I always want to respond strongly, right? That says we are regulated. But yes, of course, we can always do better. There are tons of opportunities to get that even closer to where we need to be with new technology and innovation like peptides and bacteriophages and liposomes that has a different way to deliver in your body, right? The innovation is pretty advanced, and regulations need to keep up to make sure that dietary supplements are always regulated.
Hi, I'm Elena, R&D leader and co-founder of Endless Thesis. If you're curious how science, leadership, and real-world experience come together, check out Beyond the Lab Coats. It's more than just a book. It's a journey through flavor, innovation, and growth. Visit endlessthesis.com and start thinking differently today.
But let's stay on that FTC bucket on what you can say when you can't say. I'm going through it now where I'm trying to start up a company, and I want to say things in social media like, creatine, yes, causes some bloating, but it should even out. But I don't have data to say that, right? So how do you see, startup brands, and how do you see the industry kind of balancing social media content that is easy to take down, that it's always evolving, that it kind of disappears over time because other social media posts come to the top? So how do you see that growth of regulation in the social media FTC type of bucket that says, hey, brands that are starting up are accidentally doing A, B, or C, or no, actually they're doing great. There's a lot of room there to continue. I'm seeing that there's a struggle, my own struggle. I'm like, wait, I can't really say that. I probably shouldn't be saying things like that. Let me kind of take a step back. So that opportunity for social media FTC bucket to kind of get a little bit more clear for consumers, and therefore for startup founders like myself, how do you see that FTC bucket and social media kind of evolving?
Yeah, no, of course. And that's, as you noted, it's very just important in today's world. I mean, social media just continues to grow and grow. And as you probably are aware, the TikTok shop is something where a lot of VMS companies have entered and taking and reaching different consumers in a different way, right? So there's a lot of learning and a lot of, where do we include the Shea statement? Where do we, things like that. And so it's definitely a new world that, we're experiencing, and that also the consumers are experiencing, right? And I'm sure you agree that our first as VM, people in VMS industry, especially you and your small business, right? We, our main priority and goal is to provide consumers with real information that is truthful and not misleading. And so it is tricky sometimes with social media. So for example, one thing I really would want to highlight is the use of influencers, right?
Yes.
I myself am a consumer, right? And when I follow certain people, influencers on social media, I have almost developed a trust with them, right? Like I've developed trust. I see that they like similar products as I do, their family matches mine, whatever it is that we have in common. And so if they were to show a product to me and said, this does that, then I wouldn't go and double check what they're saying, right? I would trust them and I would purchase the product, or at least consider it. And so I think it is very important for manufacturers, especially smaller ones, to keep that in mind, and not only keep it in mind that we should be delivering truthful and non-misleading information to consumers, but also to realize and understand that anything influencers say, right, will be attributed back to the manufacturer, right? So as you know, there are times when influencers don't go off script, right, and go off of the label claims and start saying how it impacted them. And although it could be true, right, that it didn't lead them to feel any bloating, as you noted, we on the manufacturing side may not have that substantiation, so it is still not appropriate to say, right? So that is an example of that. And one other thing that maybe some don't understand is that the influencer is incentivized, right? Sometimes they get free product, sometimes they are paid, right? So those incentives, or get a coupon or a discount or anything like that, that's an incentive. And because they're incentivized, then that's where the attribution comes back to us, right? Versus, Jane over here, who has no relationship to the company, just tells its influencers, I love this product. It really helped me do X, right? Like that, she's not incentivized. We don't have a relationship, right? So then that is a little bit different.
Oh, okay. That's a good differentiation, because user-generated content is a huge piece of building up brands and building up startup companies, right? And that user-generated content is incentivized. So there's a key differentiator there, and that's a fantastic way to have the audience understand that, who may not know what a UGC is, or who may not know what a influencer is or is not being paid. And then I have a funny one for you. Doctor formulated. Anything that says doctor formulated, I get a lot of PhDs saying, well, I have a PhD, so I am therefore a doctor. And technically they are correct, but that's not, I don't think, what doctor formulated means. And working with brands in my past that had that doctor formulated stamp, it always came with the symbol for the medical doctor. So a lot of brands I'm starting to hear are saying, well, we just take the medical symbol out, and therefore now it is doctor formulated. So just as an interesting, funny one, how should brands think about doctor formulated? Because it seems trivial or not even controversial, but it could be, right?
Yes, absolutely. And again, I think it's important to remember that just because something is truthful doesn't mean that it can't be misleading, right? So for the doctor formulated, right, it could be that someone with a PhD was instrumental in developing a formula, right? However, you have to step back and say, okay, so what does the doctor mean to the lay person, right? And there have been national advertising division challenges where this has come up, right? and where the common understanding and interpretation of the word doctor means just that, right? Someone in the medical field, the physician that you see or that you take your kids to visit, right? For a medical appointment. And so that is someone in the science field, someone really working on on the formulation in terms of like how things interact and how ingredients could potentially benefit, and what ingredients and what mix of ingredients should go together to provide the consumer with what they're looking for. And so that's something you really need to consider, and that VMS manufacturers need to consider when making these types of marketing claims. In addition to that is doctor formulated. So what does that even mean? What does formulated mean, right? At what point? Is it just because they counseled and they offered, some recommendations as to what should be in there, but they weren't really involved in the formulation? It really, there's no, right or wrong answer. It really just depends on the analysis of how, deep they were involved, right? In the formula, during the formulation stage. So that's also something important that brands should ask themselves, right? Is there a better claim than to say doctor formulated, perhaps because the doctor wasn't as involved, right?
Yes. No, that's I think a comical one, but one that's very relevant to a lot of brands. And I think I want to go back to the innovation side of things, because that's always a very exciting topic with GLP-1 like things, with liposomes, with bacteriophages, with peptides. There's a lot coming down the pike that is exciting and needs some sort of review to understand how it applies to consumers. But what's exciting you, and particularly in the supplement space, that you've seen that, all of these things that are coming down the pike, which ones make you nervous or which ones actually excite you because there's something good there?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think that every company, not even just the VMS, right? I think it's food, beverage, and elsewhere, is that, we do find these ingredients and that we do believe could be beneficial to a consumer. Or the other side, where consumers are finding ingredients and they're asked, and then the VMS manufacturers are looking into like, we haven't looked into that ingredient. Consumers are obviously interested, right? Like these viral videos on TikTok, right, where consumers start just seeing what's out there and demanding it, right? So then that's where it creates that consumer demand. And so, although it's very exciting, it's also very complicated at times, right? Because as I noted earlier, not only do you have to prove that it's safe for consumption, you also have to have a regulatory status to be able to support the introduction of that ingredient into the market or into your product. So, of course, there's various ways to get to the regulatory status, but it's complicated. It gets complicated. You need to follow one of those paths, and if not, you have to submit an NDI, which, as we know, that is the new dietary ingredient, right? That's what it means. And it's a complicated process, complex. It takes a while. FDA is tied up with resources, so it's not as quick as many manufacturers would like it to be, and it can also be costly.
Correct. Yeah, the cost behind a new ingredient sometimes it amazes me. It's very expensive to bring a new ingredient to market. The commercialization aspects of it, the operational aspects of it, but I think I'll throw an interesting one at you this time. In the previous podcast, we started asking people, because it came up in one of our podcasts. I don't know how much you know about superheroes, but we ask all of our guests, what is your favorite superhero, and what vitamin do you think that superhero would take? Because it's caused quite the stir in conversations, which is hysterical. But who is your favorite superhero, and what vitamin do you think they take, or nutrient?
I would say, I always liked Superman. I believe I dressed up as Superman more than 5 times when I was younger. And so what the next question is, what supplement? Based on the muscular figure of Superman, I'm sure that, he takes creatine.
All right.
To support muscle strength. I would, yes, and especially because creatine is very popular nowadays. So and it's
Yeah.
being a little bit it's a little bit more visible to consumers, and I myself take creatine, so that's what came to mind.
Love it. Absolutely love it. And Eric, I don't know if you have any comments on superhero and the use of creatine there.
No, I'm just surprised that everyone brings up Superman. I mean, there's no
Oh,
love
really?
for the
Okay.
other characters. What's happening here?
You love it.
I'm kidding.
I love it. Superman's a popular one, I guess. And then Arturo, I think one of the things that I love to talk about is your interest and your involvement in the industry or industries adjacent to supplements. What is your interest these days, and what's drawing your attention, and where do you see some excitement, either in supplements, of course, but in adjacent industries as well that you really like to research, see, and you would think the audience would love to hear, this is super interesting to me, so therefore it should be interesting to you. What's out there for you that's exciting and it's really catching your attention these days?
Yeah, no, and we talked a little bit about it earlier. It's just like these innovative ingredients that are just, coming to market, and that manufacturers are really interested in, and that consumers want, right? But just to touch on the last question a little bit, not about the superhero, but the one before that, was how not only is the regulatory status sometimes what complicates things, it's also does the new ingredient fit within the definition of a dietary ingredient that FDA has set forth, right? So that's another what complicates the process of innovation and ensuring that that it's possible to do so. So that's something that excites me, right? And always interested in seeing how these new ingredients fit within that definition. And then outside of the VMS space, but still relevant, right? I used to work at a law firm where I advised companies that manufactured food, cosmetic, beverages, some OTC, right? And then supplements, of course. And it was just extremely interesting seeing how these different products were regulated in every country. So it was, one of my tasks was to review, dozens of labels for chocolate products that were sold in, let's say, Thailand by one of the biggest chocolate companies in the world, right? And they did very well there, so they really wanted to introduce that product in the United States, right? So my job was to look through the label and make sure that label could, be appropriate within FDA regulations and FTC, right, within the claims here in the United States. There were times when it was just a very easy peasy kind of, here you go, here's a translated label, here, you're good to go. Or, hey, unfortunately there's no regulatory status for this ingredient, so we won't be able to go forward unless, we come up and develop a way forward, right? And talk, between the attorney and the client to see what can be done. And so that was very interesting, and it's continues to be interesting today, just like I said earlier with the vitamins, right? We can see a vitamin D here and a vitamin D in Europe, and they'll just be completely different. They might not even have claims. So that's of interest to me, just like the innovation behind ingredients and then the complexity that follows because of the regulatory environment, and especially on depending on where you are as well. So the second thing that I really am interested in, and I'm still thinking about what impacts it will have in the VMS industry, is the front of pack nutrition labeling that is going on for food and beverages, right? So I actually just published a chapter on this in a book of professionals who work in Mexico and the United States in different industries. And I wrote about the rise of front of pack nutrition labeling throughout the world. So Europe has one where it's called the Nutri-Score, right? And they essentially score the product based on the levels of specific nutrients and ingredients that they have, right? So there's high sodium, saturated fat, sugars, right? That will lower your score. And so even within the European Union, there are member states like Italy who are pushing back on the European Union kind of larger front of pack nutrition labeling scheme, and they want to do their own thing. What was interesting there, since we were talking about Italian food earlier, was that Parmigiano Reggiano, Parmesan cheese, right? What we call it, is a high in sodium, right, and then high in fat. But the processing is not extreme at all. It's actually just a few steps, right? So what they determine is that because of their culture of foods tend to be on the side of, higher sodium, like prosciutto, for example, they are arguing that they're inconvenienced, right? Because of their cultural foods. And now many more of the cultural foods that they have are going to have this front of pack nutrition labeling that may potentially discourage consumers, not just in Italy, but in the European Union and elsewhere, to not purchase, those products. So they created their own version of the Nutri-Score. They actually have the Nutri Battery, is what they refer to it as. And then, it's just interesting. And then South America and even Saudi Arabia is working on something. So there's just a lot there, and there's been a lot of talk here in the U.S. Under President Trump's "Make America Healthy Again" initiative, and how that might be coming up the pipeline.
Yeah, and that's a good topic as well, right? The Make America Healthy Again has, in my opinion, kind of moved supplements a little bit closer to that space of, well, now it's preventive medicine, because you shouldn't be taking, shouldn't have vaccines. You shouldn't be relying on pharmaceuticals. And therefore, then who's going to fill that gap? And supplements aren't ready for that, right? Supplements is a whole different space. So are you seeing the same thing that I'm seeing, where those regulations, the push to just think about things a little bit different, and specifically between pharma, supplements, and food, what are you seeing from the MAHA movement that may support that or not, right? I just see that supplements are more in the forefront of preventive, and I don't think supplements are ready for that just yet.
Yes, absolutely. And there is some more of a preventative angle that I see now. But as vitamins, supplements are not drugs, and they should not be marketed as treating, curing, or preventing a disease. Right. But what is advocated for and what is supported is the use of VMS products for healthy people to take, to ensure that they're getting the nutrients that they need, so that they continue having a strong immune system. So, if anything were to come their way, right, they'd have more of a strong, they'd have that healthy, strong immune system that they maintain with VMS products. So I do see that now being highlighted and almost motivated, right? People are being motivated to get more of that preventative type of mental state, to just be proactive, right? And I think that's the word, just be proactive. And similarly, it's there are also, I think, as the prohibition on certain colors now, F, D, and C colors, is pretty big. And so that, although I know that industry and the scientific community at times have some disagreements as to whether they should be prohibited or what type of impact they have on a person's health, right? It putting that aside, it really shows that the governmental agencies, specifically in California, right, are really looking into how do we prevent, how do we ensure that not as many people, get sick or get these, things that are said to, occur, right, with certain ingredients like colors, right? Even though it's debated, right, they're proceeding that way.
Carrageenan, colors, high fructose corn syrup. There's a lot of ingredients have the black eye, so to speak, and whether some of them deserve it or not, it's nuanced. This episode of the Balterra Wellness Podcast is brought to you by Balterra Incorporated, bringing trust back into the supplement space. Remember, stay balanced, stay clear. Now back to our show. And you sit in California, so I'll ask you a little bit about Prop 65 and a little bit of education around Prop 65. What does it mean? Consumers outside of California may not know much about Prop 65. So, and from your experience and your perspective, sitting in a state that really pushes for that label, how do you internalize and communicate Prop 65 to either people in the industry or consumers in general, just to understand what Prop 65 is?
Yeah, so Prop 65 is pretty much a legal requirement that OIHA, a governmental agency in California, oversees, where they have 900 plus chemicals in this list, right? That says, hey, if you're introducing a product that has one of these 900 plus chemicals in it, right, you need to ensure that it is safe. And how do you ensure that it is safe? You need to be below what they call the safe harbor, right, which is the threshold. It gets complicated sometimes because there aren't thresholds for all of the different chemicals, right? So then what happens there to be able to show that you are compliant, that you are showing safety, is you have to develop your own safe harbor. And of course, that can take a lot of resources, and it can be very costly, right? And then you have to find the professionals, especially if you're a growing company. You need to have the professionals and hire the scientists to be able to help you with that analysis, right? Like toxicologists, etc. So one example that I always share with people when they ask me about Prop 65 and how it really impacts small companies or companies that are trying to introduce their product into the American market is when I was at the law firm before my current job, I counseled a French client who sold these amazing croissants in Paris. And he wanted to introduce them to California, into the California market, right?
Yeah.
So not only was it that, hey, give me your label, give me your list of ingredients, your formula, right, to make sure that everything is compliant in the US. It also involved, the ingredient list also involved, hey, what are the amounts of these ingredients in there? What is, so that we can determine, right, are there any of those chemicals that we need to refer back to the Prop 65 list to see if they're in there. For this specific client, it was unfortunate because they did have a chemical in there that's called acrylamide or acrylamide. It's pronounced differently by depending on who you speak to. And so there was a discussion then as, hey, we either not introduce it or we somehow reformulate it to make sure that it is below that safe harbor. Right. Yeah. And so as you can imagine, the client was like, no, like, this is my perfect formula. This is great. People love it in Paris. People are going to love it here. Right. And what was interesting is that shortly thereafter, there was a lawsuit on acrylamide and how certain professional scientists in the industry were not in agreement with OIHA and California in that acrylamide was a chemical that was unsafe, or that should have even been in the list in the first place. And so acrylamide happens when you, for example, when you roast coffee beans, right? When you walk into Starbucks, you see a California Prop 65 warning that says, you might encounter a chemical here, right? And among others, acrylamide is one of them. And for example, when you're at your house in your kitchen and you toast, you put some bread in and to have some toast, right, in the toaster, there is acrylamide there, right? And so even though it is man-made, right, you are toasting the bread, it's debatable, right, whether or not that should even be in the list, or whether it's safe or not for consumers.
No, fantastic. Very detailed. I appreciate that type of explanation, and it's one that we grapple with in the industry a lot, especially with macronutrients that bring a lot of those types of, I'll call them byproducts, even though not all of them are byproducts, but those types of chemicals in there.
One thing I just wanted to add too is that there is a debate as to whether it's even effective or important to have these warnings, right? There's this thing called warning blindness, where you see this warning everywhere you turn, right? There's 900 chemicals listed on the list, where, like, are consumers even reading them? Are consumers just used to them and used to seeing them on the wall, or when you go inside a parking lot, right?
Yeah.
Or a grocery store, or a product that you eat regularly, right? So are they just tuning that out? I don't know. It's debatable as to whether it is effective in leading consumers to decrease the consumption of certain product with certain ingredients.
What a great perspective there too. I think the label blindness is an interesting verbiage I haven't considered, but that's a key consumer behavior and how they see potential red flags on products, especially those who aren't used to it, those that have the blindness, and those that are just coming in and be like, oh my goodness, what's happening here. But very, very interesting. And then I'll throw it to our IT specialist here, who probably has a lot of questions, who he's not part of the supplement space, so especially the Superman question. But go ahead, Eric, any questions for Arturo from your perspective and what you've heard so far?
I just wanted to know Arturo, how did you get into the food law business,
Yeah, no, it's an interesting path that I took. It was not intentional. I did not plan on being a food lawyer. So my first job out of college, I worked for the city of New York under Mayor Michael Bloomberg. So it was a great job. During that position, I was one of the first, I worked at the first food policy coordinator's office under the city hall. So what that entailed is just ensuring that we increased access to healthy foods to all 5 boroughs in New York City. So basically trying to reach the impoverished communities that did not have access to those healthy foods. And for those who lived in food deserts. So if you don't know what a food desert is, basically a neighborhood, community, town, a specific area of a city that doesn't have grocery stores where you can get fresh produce, fresh fruit, right? And where there's a McDonald's right across the street, and then there's another fried chicken place, right?
Dollar store that
right?
A bodega, right?
But yeah.
Sometimes even bodegas aren't around, because I lived in New York City for almost 5 years, and bodegas sometimes do have those alternate foods that could be that are healthier options. Not all the time, but sometimes there are, depending on which one you go to. But as Eric, usually in those communities, unfortunately, there are less options that are healthy. So what I did there was work with the food policy coordinator. And I'm not sure if you've been to New York City, where they have little carts of fruit and vegetables at times, and so they introduced those in communities where there weren't grocery stores that serve produce and fruit, and so they brought those carts there and allowed individuals to use their EBT cards for produce. So that was a big help, right? And I was involved in that. So that kind of laid the foundation for my career. I was really interested in food policy and just the legality behind decisions that go and just regulate our food, right? And what we can eat and how we can eat and when we can eat. So that really was really interesting and helpful in kind of guiding me to what I wanted to do. Then I decided I want to go to law school. I worked at a law firm on Wall Street and, worked really long hours as a paralegal. And despite that craziness, I still said I wanted to become an attorney. I went to law school, and during law school is when it really kicked off. I went in there actually thinking I was going to be a district attorney. I really, really appreciate and find criminal law very interesting. But it was, as you can imagine, being in law school, I was pretty broke, and I decided to take a research project with a professor who worked at the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. And so then that's when I understood what a food lawyer was. I had no idea what it was. And I was tasked with reviewing food safety requirements and things that food delivery companies had to take into consideration, right? Because at that time, DoorDash, Uber Eats, right, were very new. And, HelloFresh, right, delivering groceries, what regulations are there to ensure that the delivery of those food items are, and especially more of like the, you know, the ones like sushi, for example, raw fish, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do we ensure that they get to the consumer and it's still in a safe state, right? So that was really interesting. It really got me thinking about it. And through that research, I met other food lawyers in San Francisco, and you know, a few steps later, I took a job with a law firm based in San Francisco that is known for its food regulatory work. So that's where I, you know, like what I noted earlier, I advise food, beverages, cosmetics, right, OTC products, supplements. And shortly after that, before I joined the current job that I have, I worked as a consultant for the Food and for the United Nations, the Food and Agriculture Organization. So there I got a little bit more of that work experience where I understood the policy side now, where the UN went to developing countries who don't have food safety, regulatory scheme that, you know, that regulates food in their country. And so I consulted the UN office who did that and went there and try to, you know, help them implement, adopt, craft regulations around food that work for their culture, right? For their country. Wow. As we all know, we can't just copy and paste a regulatory scheme, because you really need to make sure that it works for the consumers in that area. So after that, I just, you know, I was recruited, and I decided to go in-house at Pharmavite and the makers of Nature Made Vitamins, where I currently am now. And it's just been a wonderful time. I've really gone deep into VMS, as Jose knows. And so that's what I do now. And I definitely continue to be in the food space for, you know, the long term.
That's right.
And now, as Jose mentioned earlier, I'm really digging deep into the international kind of regulatory schemes and comparing and contrasting and just really understanding how other countries do it.
That is super impressive. Oh my God.
There's so much, Eric, right? You don't realize how much there is behind all that. No, and I've learned so much from you, Arturo, in the time that we've worked together. I really appreciate you joining us today. Is there anything else you want to leave the audience with that we haven't covered that you thought, you know, would be important, that you think consumers should know, or anything, a nice little departing message or anything like that you want to say?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's something I've learned after, you know, counseling consumer good products, right? Yeah. Is that every consumer should just really question what companies are saying about their products, right? I'm lucky that I work at a company where we really value our consumers, and they're our priority in making sure that they are provided with a truthful and non-misleading information. That's where right. Unfortunately there are other companies out there, and not just in the VMS space, that really don't do the same, or they aren't as good as it because they're not educated. They don't know the regulations, right? Sometimes it's not on purpose, right? It's not like they're just trying to make money. It's just they don't have that guidance, right? So it's always important for especially a smaller company, to not see regulations as a barrier, but more of an opportunity to be innovative and from the start comply, but also do it in a creative way that will resonate with consumers.
Absolutely well stated. Thank you so much, Arturo, for your time. Thank you for all your knowledge here. I really appreciate you jumping on. I think the audience would appreciate it as well. And this has been an episode of Balterra Wellness Podcast. Stay balanced, stay clear.
Thanks for listening to the Balterra Wellness Basics and Advanced Podcast. Your host for this episode was Jose Barbosa. We thank our guest host, Arturo Reyes, for joining us on the show. Production, editing, and technical support were provided by Eric Santana. This episode was brought to you by Endless Thesis Holdings and Balterra Incorporated. This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and is not medical advice. Always consult a qualified healthcare professional regarding any health concerns or before starting any supplement, diet, or wellness program. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.